In this lesson, I want to take you through a 6-step workout that will help you prepare for improvising over the chord progression of a jazz standard. In this workout, I'll be using 3 techniques that I've covered in previous videos in this series, which are improvising with chord notes only, improvising with chord notes and diatonic passing notes, and improvising with chord notes, diatonic passing notes and chromatic passing notes. And in each case, I will first play an unbroken continuous line of 8th notes or quavers, followed by the same line but with some alterations to the rhythm. I'm going to use the chord progression from the A section of An Afternoon in Paris. Now, like a lot of jazz standards, An Afternoon in Paris has what we call an A-A-B-A structure. The A section is the first 8 bars, which are then repeated. You then have the B section, which is different. We often call that the middle 8. And then we return to the A section once again. So even though I'm only using the first 8 bars, that actually covers 3/4 of the whole standard. Now, before we get on to actually creating the lines, I want to do a quick harmonic analysis of the A section. So in bars 2 and 3, we have a C minor 7, F7, B flat major 7 chord progression. This is a 2-5-1 chord progression in the key of B flat major. Now in bars 4 and 5, we then have a B flat minor 7, E flat 7, A flat major 7. And this is a 2-5-1 chord progression, but this time in the key of A flat major. And in bar 6 and 7, once again, we have a 2-5-1 chord progression, this time D minor 7, G7, going to C major 7, and this is a 2-5-1 chord progression in the key of C major. And then in bars 8, returning to 1 for the repeat, we have another 2-5-1 in the key of C major. The 2-5-1 chord progression crops up time and time again in jazz standards, and therefore you must become thoroughly familiar with this chord progression in as many keys as possible. There is a PDF available for this lesson. The link is in the description below. There is also a link for a bundle of 5 PDFs with a 50% discount. So it's $2 for 1 PDF or $5 for 5 PDFs. Now, all the lines in this lesson, as usual, are in all 12 keys in the PDF. Being realistic, I wouldn't expect you to try and learn all these lines in all 12 keys, or at least not straight away. But if you did say the lines in just this key, and then in the key of D flat major, you would actually have covered the 2-5-1 chord progression in 6 keys already. Okay, let's look at step 1 now, improvising using chord notes only. Now, the good thing about using chord notes only is that you don't have to worry about playing notes that clash. It's basically a case of playing arpeggios and broken chords in 8th notes or quavers, and becoming familiar with patterns that join the chords together in a 2-5-1 chord progression. Now, you might have noticed that in this line, I've most of the time started every new chord on the 3rd of that chord. So, for instance, in bar 2, I start the C minor 7 on the 3rd, which is E flat. When I go on to F7, I've started on the 3rd, which is A. And then B flat major 7, I've started on the 3rd, which is D, and so on. Now, a good way of approaching the 3rd of a new chord in a 2-5-1 chord progression is from the 7th of the previous chord. So when we're going from C minor 7 to F7, we're aiming to land on A, the 3rd, and just before it, we're playing the 7th of C minor 7, which drops nicely to the 3rd. And then when we're going to B flat major 7, we drop from the 7th of F7 to the 3rd of B flat major 7. It's just the same kind of voice leading that you do in the chords. If you look at the left hand on the C minor 7 going to F7, I'm just playing what we call a shell voicing, the root and the 7th, going to the root and the 3rd. And once again, the 7th of C minor 7 drops to the 3rd of F7. Now, there's a couple of places where I don't start the new chord on the 3rd. For instance, in bar 4, I start the B flat minor 7 on the 3rd. I do an arpeggio going up to the 9th. That arpeggio, by the way, starting on the 3rd of a chord, going up to the 9th, is used ever such a lot. I then drop to the 5th of chord 5, E flat 7. So if you do that arpeggio on chord 2, going up to the 9th, it drops nicely to the 5th of chord 5, just as the 7th of chord 2, say in the C minor 7, the 7 drops nicely to the 3rd of F7. Now, remember to play these in a swing feel. I talked about this in lesson 1 in this series. And also look at the accents. If you notice, I've put the accents every time the line reaches a peak and then comes back down. So in bar 1, put an accent on the top note. Now, because the top note will keep occurring in different places in the bar, it has the effect of displacing the accents, which gives it a good strong swing feel. Okay, let's go on to step 2 now. I'm going to use the same line with a few rhythmic alterations. Now, in bar 1, I've just missed a couple of notes out. So instead of going, I've missed the first note out and then the 8th note on the downbeat of beat 4. So now, it's always a good idea to avoid starting a solo on the downbeat of beat 1. It gives it a strong sense of forward motion and swing feel. And by missing the 8th note out on the downbeat of beat 4, it's given the second half of the bar a kind of syncopated feeling. And that's why I've accented the C. In the second bar, I've missed the C out of this little pattern. And I've made the G a quarter note. So again, a syncopated rhythm. And when you get a syncopated rhythm, accent the long note. Now, on bar 4, instead of going from the 9th of B flat minor 7 straight down to the 5th, I've kind of delayed the resolution onto the 5th by tying the C to another 8th note. Now, that delayed resolution is another really useful technique. Another syncopated rhythm on the A flat major 7 chord. And then I just missed a note out of the next to the last bar. So just doing these little tweaks with the rhythm can give the thing come to life and give it a really good strong swing feel. Remember when you're practicing to take everything one step at a time. If you find it difficult to keep the flow going, then just look at one of the 2-5-1 chord progressions and work on that. Get thoroughly familiar with the different patterns. When you're practicing, it's really important to practice playing in time, either with a metronome or using something like iReal Pro. In lesson 2 in this series, I talked about the use of passing notes, both diatonic and chromatic. A passing note is simply a non-chord note that passes in between 2 chord notes. So, for instance, if you take a simple C major triad, 3-note chord, C, E and G are chord notes, D is a passing note that passes in between C and E, and F is a passing note that passes in between E and G. Now, these are diatonic passing notes because they belong to the key that you're in. A chromatic passing note is one that isn't from the key that you're in, and it's often used to pass between a passing note, a diatonic passing note, and a chord note. So, for instance, if you're going from E to G, 2 chord notes, you can have S as a diatonic passing note, and then F sharp as a chromatic passing note in between. Okay, let's have a look now at how I've used some diatonic passing notes in step 3. Now, a passing note can pass between a chord note from one chord to a chord note in the following chord. For instance, at the end of bar 1, C major 7, the last note I played was G. Now, I'm aiming to go to the third of C minor 7, E flat, and I'm putting a passing note, F, in between the G and the E flat. Now, that's actually falling on the downbeat and then resolving onto the third. Now, in classical harmony, we would call that an accented passing note. That's a passing note that falls on the downbeat, resolves onto the chord note on the upbeat, and then he usually goes to another chord note. So although usually in jazz we aim to play chord notes on the downbeat, sometimes playing a non-chord note, a passing note on the downbeat, as long as it resolves then straight away by step to a chord note, then usually goes to another chord note, can be quite effective. On the B flat major 7 chord in bar 3, I do an arpeggio, just going down an octave, and then I do again an accented passing note, C, in between the D and the B flat. And then on the B flat minor 7 in the following bar, once again I've got an accented passing note going on to the D flat. On the A flat major 7 chord in the next bar, I've just got a passing note D flat in between the C and the E, and this is an unaccented passing note. I use it twice to bring me back to the C. On the D minor 7 in the following bar, I've got a passing note G in between the F and the A, again an unaccented one. So you can see that using these passing notes can be quite effective, and we start to get little bits that are more like scales rather than arpeggios. In step 4, I've used the same line again, but with some alterations to the rhythm. I've missed some notes out, put some syncopated rhythms in, etc. Rhythm is so important. You want to spend a lot of time listening to the jazz greats, listen to their phrasing, listen to the way they articulate the notes. You can pick up so much from them. And in step 5, I've introduced some chromatic passing notes as well as diatonic ones. Let's look at the first bar. I'm starting on the third of C major 7. And basically, I'm playing a scale there, but if we look at the notes there, we're going from E to C, chord note. D you can think of as the 9th of the chord or as a passing note in between C and E. It doesn't really matter. Now, you can think of both B as a chord note, that's the 7th, the major 7th, and A, the 6th, is also a chord note. I've then got a chromatic passing note, G sharp, taking you between the A and the G. And what I've ended up with there is actually what we call a bebop major scale. By putting the G sharp in, we end up on a chord note again on the downbeat just there. Now, I've done a whole series about bebop scales. I'll put a link in the description below. It is more advanced things, but you might want to have a look at that at some point. In bar 2, at the end of the bar, instead of going to the 7th of F7 to then land on the 3rd of B flat major 7, I've used a different route. I've gone down to C, the 5th, and then put a chromatic passing note in, leading to the 3rd. And again, that's another sort of way of approaching the 3rd of the following chord that is used ever such a lot in jazz. And in step 6, I've once again just used the same line but with some alterations to the rhythm, and it's surprising what a difference that can make. If you just look at the first bar and compare, and then just miss out the first note, it's got that feeling of moving forward. And then in bar 3, delaying the resolution of the 9th onto the root. Instead of going, I'm going. That kind of thing can make such a difference. Okie doke, I hope you found this useful. If you did and you haven't done so far, I'd be really appreciate if you give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and always appreciate any comments that you may have or questions that you may want to ask me. Thank you. See you in the next video.